Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Flower Power Live. Today is February 28th. It's the last day of February. Woohoo! And so, it's going to be March starting tomorrow, and we can all look forward to warmer and lighter days here in the Northern Hemisphere. But, there's one plant that just doesn't wait. It just is a true winter bloomer, and that plant is witch hazel, also known as Hemamelis virginiana, or another species that we find here in America is Hemamelis vernalis. So let's find out a little bit more about witch hazel. But before we start, I just wanted to say that my name is Allison from the Well Cultivated Light, and thank you so much for joining me here. I'm an herbalist and an ecologist, and I love to share this info with you. If you're watching me on YouTube, make sure you subscribe and like. Now, let's jump right into this most obvious question. What does witch hazel have to do with witches? And the answer is not really that much. The name actually comes from Middle English word, which is witch, W-Y-C-H, or sometimes spelled W-Y-C-H-E, and it means flexible or pliable, which relates to the branches of the witch hazel tree. And the word hazel comes from the fact that the leaves of this plant look very similar to the hazelnut trees, but they're actually not related at all. Well, now these pliable branches actually were a great, and probably still are, a great to be used as a divining rod, which is sort of an ancient tradition that many people might not understand sort of the meaning of and might think of it as a little witchy, if you will. And let's face it, most of the time, a lot of these village herbalists were the ones that might have gotten accused of witchcraft when in fact they were just creating medicine. And, if you're out in the middle of winter collecting some branches off of a tree that's blooming, people might be a little bit suspicious about what you're up to. Now, I say the middle of winter because this plant really does bloom in the middle of winter. It blooms in the off season, and that can vary between sort of November all the way through January, depending on what region you live in. And I was inspired to share this plant partly because I grew up in a house with plant loving parents, not surprisingly, I suppose. And so we had this witch hazel shrub right outside of our window. And I remember celebrating when the witch hazel was blooming because nothing else had leafed out yet. And it was these beautiful yellow blooms right in the middle of winter. And I recall that being something more like, let me show you this. Where are we? There it is. Um, so it has these yellow blooms on it like this. And I remember it being right around the beginning of February. That could be wrong. Who knows? So this is the blooms. And then this is the fall foliage that you can see on the regular Hemamelis virginiana. There have been a lot of cultivars that have been developed because something that blooms in midwinter is very desirable to put into your garden. And these are some of the other types of varieties that have these beautiful fall foliage. And they also have these really funky seed pods, like a little seed capsule that ejects the seed out right around the same time as the plant is blooming. And so it gets pollinated in midwinter, but it doesn't eject its seed till almost a year later. Now, of course, just about everybody has a bottle of this or something close to it in their bathroom cupboard. And this bathroom staple is usually thought of as using for skin irritations and also for using for hemorrhoids because it does have this sort of astringent and anti-inflammatory property to it. But one of the things is that what I found out is these types of commercial preparations, a lot of times they don't really have a whole lot of the actual witch hazel in it, and it is just have a high amount of alcohol content. And that's because they're using a steam distillation. So they're kind of steaming off the leaves and the bark, which are the main parts used. And then they're just using alcohol to preserve the final steam distillation. Either way, this is a great type of a home remedy that you could make yourself because it has a lot of great uses, according to Jeannie Rose, my favorite hippie herbalist from the 70s. The twigs, bark, and leaves can be used for an astringent, hemostatic, styptic, which means it helps to stop bleeding, sedative, and tonic. And she also notes that you can take it internally for diarrhea and externally for inflammation. You can create a poultice, which is where you are putting the actual plant material onto the skin. And then you also make an infusion, a tea, which would be for sore throat, sore gums, tea, or you can even use it as a douche for vaginitis. And then for the hemorrhoids, you generally would use that as an ointment rather than a straight alcohol. That would not be very, very comfortable. And one of the reasons why this is so effective is because the primary ingredient in a lot of barks, not just witch hazel, are these tannins, and the tannins are the types of compounds that have these astringent properties. Now, again, there's all these great uses, but it's telling you to make a tea and decoction and drink this down for diarrhea. Not this, okay? Not this. In fact, on the back, it says external use only. And part of that's because the alcohol content in there, sometimes they will even use rubbing alcohol in these types of preparations, not the ethanol, which is what we as humans can drink, that's safe for us to drink. So make your own. I have personally not made it, but I'm going to now that I've done this show. And what you're going to do is you're going to do a decoction. And what that is where because it's a bark that you're using, you can just go to your local favorite herb shop. You do have a local favorite herb shop, I hope, by now. If you've been watching me for a while, you should have a local herb shop that you love. And you just take the bark and you simmer it in water for at least an hour. Then you're going to strain it out. And you're going to either put it in the fridge, or you can add a little bit of alcohol to it if you want to preserve it. And another thing I saw said that you can even add, if you're going to mostly just use it topically, you would add maybe even some aloe to it to make it a little bit more soothing for your skin. Now, let's see here. Oh, there was one other thing about the alcohol. You could just make an alcohol extract out of the bark for yourself as well, but there are some other compounds that come out when you do the alcohol extract. This is why they commercially do the steam distillation. It leaves this other compound in the plant material. So it sounds like a decoction is really going to be your best bet if you want to make it for yourself. Of course, always try things on your skin. Always sample a little bit before you really make a commitment to using something regularly. Now, one other way that I love to use witch hazel, and in this case, I could just use this prepared here, is when I want to make a room spray with essential oils. By adding water and then also adding some witch hazel to it, it helps the because there's alcohol in it as well as the witch hazel. It helps the oils dissolve better in the water, which, as we all know, oil and water don't mix. So it keeps you from gunking up your sprayer, and it just helps to distribute the oils way better. Now, I generally have a few main resources I go to for flower essence information, and it was interesting. There was quite a few. It was a little bit harder to come to a consensus among my favorite people on to exactly what witch hazel is used for. But the main message is that the witch hazel essence helps you to unite opposing ideals. Another thing I saw said that it can really help with winter depression, which kind of makes sense because that's sort of a doctrine of signatures idea where the plant's blooming in the winter. I mean, hey, you don't even have to take the flower essence to feel better seeing something blooming in the middle of winter, right? So Delta Garden says that witch hazel essence supports those struggling with dilemmas and paradox in their lives. It helps us make sense of opposing ideals and integrate practical matters with our ideals. It uplifts your spirit and helps you to have sort of promise and hope that these things will work out. Now, according to Yorkshire Essence, one of these areas where these opposing ideals can play out is when people are brought up in a family where they need to be constantly pleasing the parents to be accepted. And so what they're doing is they're trying to live up to their parents' expectations instead of their own. And so you see that as an adult, the people that's constantly volunteering for everything and doing everything for everyone else. And they might not even be aware of where this comes from. So witch hazel helps the mind to like drop this dependence on this kind of repeating behavior and then start to look at my ideals versus the ideals of other people that I've been conditioned to think that's what I need to do to be accepted by others. Now, one other way that this plays out, according to Pacific Northwest Essences, is that this this is can be really helpful for people who have some sort of either intuitive, clairvoyant, or spiritual kind of gift, but they are really afraid of bringing this gift forth, using this gift because they're being afraid of being called a weirdo or even, a witch. And so, what this can do is can help this person embrace these gifts, figure out the best way to use them, and kind of bring these two opposing, that's some pretty opposite ideals, witches versus, spiritual. And so it can really help them to feel more comfortable with that. And again, this unification of these opposing forces is not, these forces aren't necessary, or ideals aren't really necessarily incompatible. They're just kind of at odds with each other right now. And so, uh, they also wrote that the best example that I read was that one of the women used this in her children's bath and saw them play agreeably without fighting for at least 45 minutes. A fight-free bath? I don't know anything that could prove its effectiveness better than that. Two children, two opposing forces, right? So if that's something for you, check out the flower essence. Now, this week, oh, I'm still getting used to using these things here. So let me show you the flowers. So these are the flowers here. This one in the, let's see, if you're looking at it, it's probably in the upper left corner. The one with the snow on it that's going to be your standard uh, Hamamelis virginiana, these two. And then in the bottom here, you can see one that's a little bit more red, and that's going to be another one of these cultivars. And this is what the flowers look like close up. Now, our card is from the Herbcrafter's Tarot, and the words on the card say, full hands, rich life, balance on the edge of depth and lightness, find joy in each moment. And the picture on the card shows a blanket of French snow covering the ground on a winter day. The vibrant yellow flowers of a witch hazel tree illuminate the scene. The other plants on the land are brittle and leafless. Colored ribbons are tied to the, let me make it bigger so you can see it. Colored ribbons are tied to the branches, and a family of healthy blue tits emerges from a woven birdhouse for a midday snack. Some cute little birds there living in the branches and using this plant for shelter at this time of year. So, witch hazel in this deck is the two of earth, and the twos represent plants that are shelter, they're good for pollinators, and they also represent the spark at the beginning of an action that will lead to sort of collaboration or reciprocity. And they're they're referring to us working with plants and the reciprocity from working in nature. But I loved how witch hazel fits well as a spark because it does ignite our spring. This is the first plant that's blooming as the spring starts. So they go on to say this: flowering in late winter, witch hazel blends the edges of winter and spring, grief and joy, depth and lightness. The ability to hold the tension between opposing interests brings prosperity. And that last line, I just really loved that last line. The ability to hold the tension between opposing interests brings prosperity. And right now, there's a lot of tension of waiting for spring to actually break. And it can feel kind of destabilizing. Like, how much longer do we really have to wait? We're sitting here and waiting to bloom. But Witch Hazel is saying, no, I'm not waiting. I'm going for it right now, even though it may seem risky. And this is where this tension comes from. So these important opposing forces. This is in humans, we have these opposing forces of logic, don't bloom now, it's winter, right? And instinct, knowing well, this is the right time. And so, are there two opposing forces like this and that you've been kind of wrangling with recently? And so the question is, are you allowing logic, like the way it should be, the ideal of my parents, the things that, society tells me that I have to do? Is that holding you back from coming into bloom? And in 2022, we're examining our structures, which means we're looking at boundaries and the way that we organize things. But we're not just building those; we're also learning to step over some of those and step into things that let's go of some of this tension and step into things where we're no longer keeping ourselves small anymore. So if this is what's happening for you, just take a deeper look at this kind of inner conflict between something intuitive that you might be feeling that you want or need to do versus the logical mind that's keeping you from taking action on that. So give a little leeway, move a little in the other direction, and you will take this risk and reap the reward. So that is our message from Witch Hazel, and I hope you enjoyed it. And I just want to give you a little heads up that I'm really excited. I am in the process of building a new online community that is going to be launching probably around the first week of April or so. It's a fair amount of work to put this together, but I'm really looking forward to it. So make sure you're subscribed or following or whatever platform you're on, so that you can hear about it when it opens up. So have a great night, everybody. And thanks again for joining me here for another Flower Power Live. Take care, everyone. Bye.